of God. So if you do what I did, and that is you go to your Bible and you count from Jesus to God here in Luke chapter 3, you'll have a total of 77 names in the lineage that produced Jesus Christ. So I want you to get this in your mind, because that number is significant to them. So here we have the capital city, and what we're going to see in this video is all of these sculptures and images and street layouts. They all point to the dawning of a new age and a new world and the birth of a new Christ on the earth. So the number 77 being about the production or the coming of the Messiah on the earth. So here we have a utopia city built on longitude 77. Now, let me give you a little sideline information to kind of show you how this works. Do you remember on September 11th, 2001, not only did we have the Twin Towers fall, which I believe were a picture of the two pillars of Freemasonry, Jachin and Boaz, being destroyed so that a new one could come up in its place. Go back to the first video and get information on that. But the Pentagon also was destroyed. Now, some people say it was a plane, some say it was a missile. I don't know what it was, but I know that I know the Pentagon was the target of this particular scenario that played out on September 11th, 2001. We're going to see more about it. But do you know how tall the Pentagon building is? It's exactly 77 feet tall. Do you remember what flight it was that flew into the side of the Pentagon building? Well, it was Flight 77. In Texas, there's a highway called Highway 77. Now, this highway goes through Waco, Texas. Do you remember back years ago, the Branch Davidian compound that was burnt down to the ground, and David Koresh? That Branch Davidian compound was near Waco, Texas. Waco, Texas is on Highway 77. By the way, guess how old David Koresh was? He was 33 years old. Highway 77 goes northward into Dallas, Texas. In fact, Elm Street, you remember the whole thing about Dealey Plaza where John F. Kennedy was assassinated? On the 11th month, the 22nd day, let's see, that's a number 33 as well. But these three streets that make up Dealey Plaza go into what's called the Triple Underpass, and they'll head and intersect right at Highway 77. Highway 77 then goes northward into Oklahoma City, where you find the Alfred P. Murrah building. Alfred P. Murrah was a 33rd degree Freemason, supposedly bombed by Tim McVeigh, and Tim McVeigh was executed. Guess how old he was? He wasn't 77. He was 33 years old. Now let's look at a tale of two cities. One is called Heavenly Jerusalem. The other city is called Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. Now these represent the two opposites that you see all the time in the scriptures. You have, and by the way, let me say this. The word city in the King James Bible is found in exactly 777 verses of the Bible. Now that's interesting, because here we have a guy that we're going to talk about in the next video by the name of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley happened to write a book called 777 and Other Kabbalistic Writings of Aleister Crowley. This book was all about the Kabbalah, which is about the divine man and numerology. But, let's hook the train back up again, and let's talk about these two cities for a minute. Let's get a biblical explanation of them both. First, let's talk about Heavenly Jerusalem, which that's where I want to be one of these days. Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 3. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The opposite of that would be a new world order. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. Now this verse shows you that God already has a plan for man's eternity. And that is that at some point, and we believe that after the millennial reign of Christ occurs, that God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And now heaven and earth are going to be joined together or bridged together without sin. It will be the utopia that all these occultists keep wanting. But heaven and earth will be joined together by a new city called New Jerusalem. It is pictured as a beautiful bride adorned for her husband, a virgin bride who is prepared for the great wedding of Christ and his church. And what a glory that's going to be. But then we have another city that would be its exact opposite. Heavenly Jerusalem comes from heaven down to earth, and it's a virgin bride. This other city called Babel is a harlot city that seeks to go from earth to heaven. Let's look at Genesis chapter 10 to find the builder of this new city. Genesis chapter 10 verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. Remember, Cush was of the cursed lineage of Ham. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Some say that he was actually a giant. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So if you've heard a lot of stories about the Sumerians and about some of these things about giants and the Anunnaki and all this stuff, which you ought not believe. You ought to just believe the biblical account of it and you'll be okay. But Nimrod was the one who established the first kingdoms on the earth. And he built a town or a city called Babel. Then we go back to Genesis chapter 11. Let's look at this verse again. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So remember, God has a city that descends from heaven down to earth. God himself is going to bridge the gap between he and mankind. Mankind, however, led by Lucifer, has a different plan. That is not to let God descend down, but to try to elevate man upward. And so they're going to build a tower, a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven. That plan is still in existence today. Here is a graphic of an artist's depiction of the Tower of Babel. And here is a photograph of the European Union Parliament building. It is the new Tower of Babel. Now, what we're going to focus on in this video is the fact that I believe that Washington, D.C. was intended to be the capital city, not just of America, but of a new world order. And remember, what better place to build a new world order than in the new world? So here this new land was chosen, and this street was laid out. Now you look at an aerial picture or a map of Washington, D.C., and you see all these lines intersecting all over the place. This was because Washington, D.C. was laid out on the basis of what's called sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is one of those things. There's another term for it called geomancy. It's an effort to use divination or to send a secret message by way of locations or symbols or lines that are upon the earth. Some people refer to them as ley lines. And they believe that these lines and these buildings and these monuments all have this special significant power that will bring in or usher in a new world. It's kind of like, you remember that movie, The Field of Dreams, where Kevin Costner kept hearing that thing in his ear, if you build it, they will come. That's kind of the concept behind Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was built more or less as an invitation to this new world order that is going to be established based upon Daniel's fourth kingdom mentioned in Daniel chapter 2. Now the thing about all these intersecting lines and the street layouts and the map and things like that if you're walking the streets of Washington, D.C., you're driving through them, none of these things really make sense. They only make sense when they're viewed from above. Most people for years who never saw a map of Washington, D.C. didn't know that there was a pentagram there. And we'll see that here in just a little bit. But it's amazing what we're finding out now that we have the ability to fly over or use satellites, Google Earth, to see these things firsthand. Not just look at them on a map, but to see these things firsthand. It's sort of like, remember when the Nazca lines were discovered. Here you had all these intersecting lines and images and things like that nobody saw for years until a guy flew over from an airplane and said, what in the world is that? And there have been scientists and conspiracy people that have speculated about what the meanings of these things are. But the truth of it is, these things only make sense from above. Here you have Stonehenge, the images on Easter Island, the Great Pyramids, which happen to align with the three stars in Orion's belt. These things, I think, are meant to be like an invitation or a concept that says, bring it on, we're ready for a new world order. Now let's get back to Washington, D.C. As we mentioned a while ago, the first thing that stands out in your mind is that there's this big giant pentagram built into the street layout of Washington, D.C. If you remember from Dan Brown's earlier book, The Da Vinci Code, the pentagram is a symbol for what he referred to as the sacred feminine, or that women are goddesses because of their ability to procreate and produce life. And so Dan Brown used that concept of the sacred feminine in his book, The Da Vinci Code, and he tells you, and this is actually true, that the pentagram, or the symbol of the pentagram, is based upon what's called the Venus transit. The planet Venus in our skies, which we a lot of times refer to as the morning star, but sometimes it rises in the morning, sometimes it rises in the evening. And over an 8-year period, astronomers began to realize that the planet Venus will actually draw a 5-pointed star, or a pentagram, in the sky. And like I said, it takes 8 years to do this. The interesting thing about the planet Venus, though, is that during this 8-year cycle, when it's drawing this big pentagram in the sky, is that it revolves around the sun exactly 13 times. Now this gives us an occult connection with the city of Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. And the reason why I'm saying that is, in your King James Bible, you will see in Revelation chapter 17 that the name of the woman, now remember, we're talking about two cities here. We're talking about heavenly Jerusalem, which is the virgin bride of Jesus Christ, and we're talking about Mystery Babylon the Great, which is a harlot woman, and she is the wife of the beast. She is riding the beast. Revelation chapter 17. But in your King James Bible, you will note that this woman has a name written on her forehead. And in all capital letters, you find the name, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. A 13-word title. The number 13 in the Bible has to do with the love of God. The great charity chapter in the Bible is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. The phrase love of God is mentioned 13 times in the King James Bible. But you also have, that's God's pure love. Harlot love is the exact opposite of pure love. Remember the two opposites that we're dealing with here. The number 13 is also a sacred number in the occult and in Freemasonry. In the York Rite of Freemasonry, there are 13 levels. If we look at the mural of George Washington in the Capitol Rotunda, we find that George Washington is surrounded by 13 goddesses. Those goddesses are representatives of Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. When we look a little bit closer at this mural, we find that the image of George Washington, which we're going to talk about later, is surrounded by 72 stars, or 72 pentagrams. The number 72 is a veiled reference to the pentagram. There are exactly 72 degrees in the exterior angles of a regular pentagram. And in the Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah is everything that God told the Israelites not to learn from the Canaanites and the Hittites, that they went ahead and learned. And they fused it together into what they knew about Jehovah, and it was the Jewish form of the mystery religion. The Kabbalah plays heavily into the concepts of Freemasonry. In the Kabbalah, there are 72 names of God. So now you understand that the number 72 is a veiled reference for the pentagram. And the pentagram itself is a symbol for, as Dan Brown pointed out, the sacred feminine, the concept of Venus, and it specifically references the morning star. In Manly Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he teaches you that in the Great Seal of the United States of America, the unfinished pyramid, there are exactly 72 stones in there. In the National Archives building, you remember that's where the secret map was located in the movie National Treasure. In the National Archives building, that building is surrounded by 72 pillars. Now back to this pentagram. When you look at the aerial view of the street layout of Washington, D.C., I mean, you obviously see a pentagram there. And it's been noted by some Masonic authorities that this is not really a pentagram because there's like one part of it missing. And we'll talk about that in a minute because it's very interesting what we found out about this. But anyway, the apex of this pentagram just happens to be the White House, you know, where the President of the United States lives and does all of his work there. Exactly 13 blocks north of the White House, and here's that number 13 connection with the pentagram. Exactly 13 blocks north is the Masonic House of the Temple Lodge in Washington, D.C. Now, it's like I said before, it was noted by certain Masonic authorities who ridicule this idea that people see a